evening. And before I actually start the introduction, I would like to thank Mr. Feist for having us link to his website, which it's either you or your webmaster. I'm not sure.
Yeah, blame John.
Okay, John, okay.
Yeah, he does so much business with you guys, I figure he's getting a discount for it.
But it's always nice when our authors let people know that we're going to have signed copies of their book. Okay. Most people, when they turn 65,
It's the new 40.
it's the new 40, yes it is. Think about slowing down. You know, they think about retiring, you know, kicking back. Well, I think when you're a writer, you can't really do that because you can't really, like, stop writing.
Actually, for me, it's the IRS and my ex-wife's lawyer.
So, long ago and far, far away in a kingdom back in 1982, which is close to 30 years ago. I know. We were first introduced to the Rift War series with the Magician's Apprentice.
Yes.
28 titles later, this is our 28th title in this.
29 in Climate Fairy Tale.
29, you want to let it go? Okay, all right. I'll give you that one, all right. 29 titles later, and it's still going strong. Along the way, though, however, there have been other works, including short stories, graphic novels, a nonfiction book, and stories in anthologies. So I don't think that Mr. Feist is going to slow down anytime soon. However, he is wrapping up the Rift War series, but that doesn't mean that he won't start something else. So please welcome Mr. Ray Feist.
As I said a few minutes ago, I realized as I was driving down here that I'm getting to that point where I really can't talk about much other than stuff you already read. Last year, I actually remember I wanted to get into the trope of doing the right thing, which is the underlying, raison d'etre for Pug's existence and why he's the way he is. And in fact, in the book that I'm just finishing up now, A Crown Imperiled, there is a scene in there where that finally comes to the surface in a confrontation between Pug and his son Magnus about, what is the price? At what point do you just throw the towel and say, fine, I can't do it anymore? And for the sake of argument, because I don't want to spoil anything for you, let's just say that it's as close to a lose-lose as those two characters can get in failing to understand each other. Because they're both very, very smart people, but for very different reasons, they both have a very different emotional landscape, and the way in which they interact is kind of weird. And I've been, getting emails and notes on my mailing list from fans over the years about, well, Magnus is kind of, the cipher. He just really doesn't show a lot. And the answer is yes. And your point is? It's like somebody who wrote me and said, well, I really don't like Miranda. And I go, good, you're not supposed to. She's really annoying. Pug's in love with her, but I wouldn't date her. And that brings me to a slightly tangential topic, which is that people mistakenly have the idea that authors either like certain kinds of behaviors because they have characters express that, and I always find it amusing because they always look at the protagonist or the group of quote heroes and say, well, the author must believe, and they never say, well, gee, he's got this earth-eating monster that's about to devour Cleveland. I guess he's in favor of utter destruction and hopelessness and chaos.
Well, but it's just Cleveland.
Well, it's Cleveland. Cleveland's actually a pretty nice town once you
Thank you very much.
spend some time. I mean, I have a really good opera company, and ballet, not so much, but good restaurants, and mostly I think they're there to make the weather in Chicago look reasonable. Because Green Bay was busy or something. But I really haven't given a lot of thought to how much I want to kind of put some ideas out there, because I keep thinking I don't want to do the world's biggest spoiler, and say, and then you find out, Pug wakes up and it's all a dream and he's got to get off the beach. Because somebody on my mailing list actually suggested that. Oh, I'm sorry. Back to one? Back to one, okay. Hi, I'm Raymond Feist. Okay, so what can I talk about? Okay, one of the questions that was asked many books ago, which gets asked again in this one, or I may have moved that chapter to the next one, but it's either this one or the next one, where about, well, what are the gods doing about all this batshit crazy stuff that's going on? And the answer is, we are the agents of the gods. So I can talk a little bit about that because I don't think it's going to be a shock to those of you who have read everything. But I get into what the nature of the gods are, because I want to keep pointing back to this one thing that I dropped in Prince of the Blood and have referred to a couple of times, which is there is no such thing as magic. And Nacor, especially his perception of that. If you think of it as a dynamic system, a world much like this one, but one in which energy manifests itself slightly differently, and certain people are adept at plugging into it and manipulating it. And that basically Nacor was a physicist in the wrong space-time. He should have been some lunatic at Caltech blowing shit up, and, getting Nobel Prizes for it, and or just the best goddamn Texas Hold'em player in the history of Vegas, or both.
It would have made Nacor very happy.
Say playing cards with a physicist could be scary. But the idea that I'm trying to get across here is that, looking for a fresh approach to fantasy, those many years ago, I kept wondering, well, how does all this stuff work? And being very frustrated with the idea of, well, it's just magic. I thought, well, we gotta come up with a better answer than that. So I'm a little slow. It took me 30 books, but we're getting there. The idea, foremost in my mind, is that everything has to do there's two tasks assigned to these books. One, they have to entertain, and two, they have to give you people to plug into and identify with, or at least care about in some sense, so that it doesn't become this terribly abstract notion of universe building. I mean, I made the mistake early on in my career, after I hit the New York Times bestseller list, suddenly I was a real popular guy with wannabe writers who just couldn't wait to show me, their 844 pages of world building. And it's like, fine, where's the story? Oh, I haven't written that yet. I still got more details to do. I'm going, fine, it's a game, publish it. Because it ain't a novel. The thing about storytelling, I believe, is that it has to resonate at some level, even if it's just, like Terry Pratchett, just making you hit your forehead a lot and going, oh my God, he didn't say that. And groaning a lot, and then laughing a lot. And just going, this is really entertaining, silly shit. A couple of other guys who do that pretty well were Bob Aspirin and Chris Stashik. Very funny stuff. You didn't really think, when you were reading their books, that the characters were really in jeopardy. You pretty much didn't care, because you wanted to know when the next joke was coming. So that was really high on the entertaining side. At the other end of the spectrum, I think we'll pick on Steve Donaldson. I had a couple of drinks with Steve in Chicago at the, I think it was the second World Fantasy Convention there. And for anybody who's heard Steve speak, he's a marvelous speaker. A man of strong opinions, which is true pretty much anybody who's got tenure. And anyway, so he was sitting there smoking his cigar. The guy loves his big stogies. And he was going, Feist, your problem is you don't write serious fantasy. And I said, Steve, I'm pretty sure if you look in the dictionary or a good thesaurus, you're not going to see serious means unrelentingly grim. I'm pretty sure when I slogged my way through the Thomas Covenant stuff, I don't remember a joke, except for maybe Foam Follower, because he was like the last of a dying race, and what did he have to lose? But somewhere in the middle is the stuff I'm trying to write. I'm trying to be a little bit Pixie-like at moments, and I think my favorite characters to write for that kind of thing are, of course, guys like Amos and Jimmy and Nacor. The ones with all the good lines. And then I try to present my tragedy in the context of a human experience. I get really angry notes from people when they see characters just step off the curb and get hit by buses. You know, it's like, what do you mean Roland got killed chasing down, pig robbers or whatever it was, cattle thieves. And, Greylock got killed because somebody was cleaning a gun and it went off, it's like, because that's the way the universe works. It's often very random and arbitrary. And you don't get to negotiate a great death scene. I did one great obligatory death scene when Lord Boric died. I figured, okay, gotta have one of those. They got really angry when Prince Arutha fell off his horse and broke a hip at 86 and died off camera. Well, anybody who's lost an older relative to a broken hip knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know what happens. Ultimately, it's about portraying really fantastic, silly, crazy, improbable madness in a context where you buy into it from, I think, a contemporary point of view. If I have any vanity at all about what I do, it's that there's a very contemporary feeling to my characters, and I did that intentionally. I started with Magician saying, okay, who are these people relative to our common experiences in this culture? I had no idea, by the way, that the books would eventually be translated into 26 languages and be out there in 150 countries. So I really don't know. I mean, I don't, read or speak, Japanese, Chinese. Actually, I don't read or speak anything except English, and there's some debate about that. So the idea that, that same rhythm of narrative style and that same characterization came across in like the Japanese translation, I don't know. Parenthetically, there's two books that the Japanese have never gotten translated, and that was Servant of the Empire and Daughter of the Mistress of the Empire. And that's because they bought the rights to Daughter of the Empire, and then decided that they weren't going to buy the next two because, for Japan, they weren't exotic enough.
That makes sense.
Well, okay, this kind of an Asian trope. They got some 15th, 16th century stuff that's actually better, but I wasn't going to admit to that. So let's talk a little bit about where this is going, and I'm going to try to skirt around spoilers and stuff. There are a couple of concepts in the entire body of work that I want to point to as being, really important to me as a human being, I guess, and as a writer. One of which is that the universe makes sense. Our perception of it, however, is so limited, it looks incredibly chaotic. And I believe religion, for example, and I include the science of religion, or the religion of science, if you will, the adherence to the scientific discipline. These are all attempts in one way or another to formalize and to make sense out of a system that's so vast, and our perception of it is so limited, that it's almost like this desperate sense of human alienation. We really hate mysteries in one sense, which is why we love mystery novels, where at the end of the book you find out who did it. It's like, I think it would be a far better writer than I am who could write a murder mystery where at the end, you go to the last page and the detective goes, damned if I know who did it. Okay, it's a closed case, it's a cold case, put it in the cold case file, and, that happens in real life, but you as the reader want nothing to do with that. It would be, I smell a really weird contest coming on. I'm going to talk to a couple of publisher friends of mine. The mystery that has no end. I'll bet you what would happen is if you actually published that, within a week, there'd be, 1,000 emails from readers going, "You moron, don't you realize that the guy in chapter 2 wearing the blue coat was the guy," with these elaborate explanations for why the cops in the book were too dumb to understand, but it was obvious to him as the reader. The amount of speculation I get over things that I know what I'm doing, and they go, well, maybe it's because in another life, Pug pissed off the god of big fat chihuahuas, and therefore, you just get this amazing stuff. Those of you who are on my mailing list know exactly what I'm talking about, because you get some really random stuff, and my people are absolutely relatively well behaved. You want to hear some batshit stuff, you go hang out with, Anne Rice's fans.
No.
Anyway, so that's one thing. I want to get into exploration of the human longing for systemic knowledge. Without starting my own religion, because I saw what the people who followed after Ron Hubbard did. I mean, he was just a blatant thief. You know, the rest of the people after him were crazy. Also, I wanted to really explore as much as possible over a wide variety of characters. All kinds of really interesting human behavior. As I'm sitting here, I'm realizing that I probably had a bit more redemption than I intended, and you know, not as much a fall from grace as I probably should have included. And I don't know if I can find a character to take the big fall in the next 2 books. I might just throw him in there to average things out a little bit. But seeing as it probably isn't going to drive any plot points, I'm pretty much stuck with what I've done. But you know, the first redemption was Rupert. You know, and I felt pretty good about that because he was young. You know, and I figured, okay, you can screw up a lot, but you know, given the opportunity for redemption, and you honestly realize that, you know, this isn't the way to be. Fine, you know. So he cleaned up his act, and he actually, you know, did okay, and turned out to be a solid citizen, more or less, as you know, as much as a solid citizen as any multi-millionaire big businessman can be. The second one was the one I surprised myself with Casper. I really got to like the character a lot as I was writing him. You know, and by the time I got to the end of you know, Prince of Foxes, King of Foxes. Prince of Foxes was a book by Raphael Sabatini, which I almost borrowed the title for, which is why occasionally I say that. And actually, the fact is there was a lot of borrowing in terms of influence, because basically Casper is Cesare Borgia, you know, without all the murdering and incest with sisters and stuff, you know, and having a father. Interesting family. You talk about the textbook definition of dysfunctional. Those people. Anyway, so getting into the whole mindset of redemption, you know, and I guess to a lesser degree, Amarantha is a bit of a redeemed character, even though he's pretty much a low-level con man rather than a real scoundrel. You know, I'll get to questions in a little bit.
I was just going to mention Roderick.
You say what?
I was just going to mention Roderick.
Well, you know, Roderick is a guy that I must confess is probably one of my least satisfying characters as an author. Because, you know, I actually talked to a neurologist. I said, look, if the guy's a little bug fuck and you whack him in the head really hard, right before he dies, might he regain sanity? And he said, well, he might. But I'm fine, that's perfect. I had a doctor who said he might. That's all I know. He also could have, you know, ordered all little children under 6 boiled alive, but he didn't, you know, so. I don't know. I think that, you know, characters who've fallen, I guess they're in there, but what I do is they tend to have already fallen before you meet them. You know, Sylvia Esterbrook is, you know, like my all-time favorite evil bitch, you know, because I dated her in about 1968. Reasonable facsimile thereof. You know, there's a line, you know, I think my friends Glenn and Jeff heard me use it last week that I overheard it. I think it was a thing in a tweet or an email or something that a guy in a bar overheard his buddy use it. He said, "It's the best off-the-wall crazy pickup line he's ever heard a guy ever use." You know, and it goes like this. It's like a guy sees a really beautiful woman and says, "Oh, I can't talk to you." And she goes, "Why not?" And he goes, "I have a rule of thumb: the better looking the woman, the crazier she is, and you must be batshit." And I thought, you know, that is just twisted enough. If it's like the second or third martini, it might work. But ultimately, it's about, you know, looking at the, you know, like I love politics. I'm one of those crazy guys who you know, will look at politics as a spectator sport. You know, I think, for instance, John Boehner's positions on what he's doing in terms of serving his masters and, you know, keeping the crazy lunatics on the ultra right of the Republican Party from, you know, devouring their young. I mean, I admire the fact that he's the guy, you know, on the Sullivan Show, who's, you know, he's like 2 guys at the same time. He's the one who's running around with the stick and the plates, you know, just trying to keep those things from hitting while Khachaturian's saber dance is playing furiously in the background. But at the same time, he's doing it on one of those balance boards, you know, with the ball underneath, you know, so he's really got his work cut out for him. So while I am not a huge fan of a lot of the silly stuff that he says, because the Koch brothers haven't sent me any money, so I'm really not happy sending them money. I really admire the art of the politics, you know, just as like, you know, there's other stuff going on where I say I'm old, you know, older than most of you. I remember in the days when, you know, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would go have a beer, you know, and then come back and tell their two parties what the hell was going to happen, and things got done. Right? I'm old enough to remember back when Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn would go meet with Republican leadership, you know, and things would get done. You know, and now I just look at this dog and pony show, this 24/7 news cycle where everything's about. So I look at all this behavior, and you know, the way it relates to what I do as a writer is I say, well, okay, here's a human condition. Let's talk about, okay, the book, Shards of a Broken Crown. I was about to make a leap from Rage of a Demon King to Talon of the Silver Hawk when two things happened. One, I realized I owed them a book I didn't have. I mean, I had no idea what this extra book in the contract was going to be. And then I had an idea about, well, I'm leaving Krondor in this absolute just shambles. And then I remember having a discussion with Marv Wolfman, who wrote for years the Teen Titans, and Chris Claremont, who wrote the X-Men, and Julie Schwartz, who was this legendary editor at DC Comics. And you know, it was back when the Comic-Con was small enough that you could sit in one bar and everybody you knew would wander by sooner or later, you know, before it turned into the Frankfurt Book Fair for geeks. And I said, you know, what occurs to me is, you know, if Superman's battling Luthor or the Hulk is going, you know, mental, and half of downtown, you know, New York gets flattened, who cleans up the mess? And I think, I don't remember whether it was DC or Marvel, but one of them came out with like this 4 or 6 part mini.
Marvel,
like,
Damage Control.
Damage Control, yeah. Where it was like, you know, who goes out and cleans up the mess? And I was thinking of that, and suddenly I went, well, who cleans up the mess? And it was like, I wanted to write the first fantasy novel about, okay, after the big war, what happens? And it just unfolded, you know, and it gave me a couple of things I really liked. I had always thought about bringing Jimmy and Dash in, but I didn't have a story for them, you know, James's grandsons, and his son Arutha. And I had several subplots in the entire, you know, Serpent War saga where I couldn't fit them in conveniently. You know, it was a fair amount of Lord James in the first one and the last one, but the son and the grandsons, it was like, other than make them cardboard figures on the wall and just have them, you know, say lines, you know, like, isn't it lovely, I hope the flowers are blooming, you know, whatever. I didn't have any story elements for them, but they really plugged in nicely into Shards. And it gave me a chance, I really like that book for a lot of reasons, even though it's dramatically one of the least, you know, majestic. It's, you know, the lowest special effects budget of all my books. You know, it didn't blow up a city, you know, anything like that. But it was the fact that I had a guy like Arutha who, you know, his father is just this incredibly powerful person who's done heroic things on both senses of the word heroic. I mean, as a legendary character, and also just magnificent management skills. You know, and able to, you know, basically run the kingdom no matter how incompetent the king might be. You know, and of course the king wasn't. I mean, you know, Liam wasn't, and Boric was pretty good. But you know, after that it was kind of, okay, not so good. So he's that guy, and Arutha is named after, you know, this legendary character who he's the namesake. And what kind of burden that puts on a guy who is pretty damn competent and really a nice guy and got a really decent skill set, but he's not, you know, magnificent the way. And so I set that whole up for he go out and get himself killed by just trying to live up to the image. And I didn't want to beat that one to death. I wanted to kind of slip it in and have it happen and have the reader kind of go, oh, that sucks. You know, and then reflect on the futility of trying to be more than you are, and why that way can lead to destruction. And of course, Jimmy and Dash were going to be just, you know, Jimmy Part 2 and Jimmy Part 2 Sub 1, or Jimmy 2 and Jimmy 2 Prime or whatever, until I came up with the whole relationship and what was the difference between them. And that was that, Jimmy was just absolutely hell-bent on being James. He was going to grow up to be just like his grandfather. And he was going to serve the king, and Dash was the guy who, he realized that his responsibilities were a lot less well-defined in terms of the structure of the society he lived in, and a lot more by relationships. And his feeling of the need to get involved with the people of the girl he fell in love with, and take care of her people, which were the mockers, and the scum of the society, and how that would launch them on 2 entirely different courses. I played with the idea of doing a book just about that relationship, and I realized that it didn't fit the timeline, and I didn't have enough of a story to sustain a novel. So I kind of let it go, and I plant stuff in the backstories where people reflect back on that. I also, Dashiell's son, Dasher, is completely not talked about. There's only a couple of references in this book and the one before about how, Jim Dasher had an uncle that he was named after. He was named after his father and his grandfather, and named after his great uncle. His uncle. And that's how he's Jim Dasher Jameson. Or James Dasher Jameson. So, I liked that book, The Shards of a Broken Crown, because it really got into some pretty, to me, significant human experience with, the aftermath. In fact, the book was almost called Aftermath, but by that time I had gotten into, the thing of the thing, and the thing of the thing, and the thing of the thing, and, So it was, Shadow of a Dark Queen, Rise of a Merchant Prince, Rage of a Demon King, Aftermath. No, that just, it wasn't resonant, it just, so Shards of a Broken Crown. And the deal I had with my editor was that she didn't like the title very much, but she said, well, if you can work it into the narrative. And so I actually had the scene where Pug tells Patrick, pick up the shards of your broken crown and rule your kingdom. And she went, hey, very well done, I like that. Never give a writer a challenge. He'll warp an entire narrative to win a bet. Okay, so how are we wrapping up the whole thing? Yeah, no, and then the world went boom at the end. When I began, I really had no concept I was going to end up writing 30 novels, which I do believe qualifies me as the author of the world's longest trilogy. Pretty sure I got the record right now. I can't think of anybody else who's done 30 of a continuing narrative. I'm a lightweight compared to guys like Louis L'Amour, and nobody mentioned Isaac Asimov. The guy had to be taking speed. Every time I saw Isaac, he was pretty affable, but I swear he had to have an evil twin locked in a room, chained to a typewriter. He had this little Olivetti he got that he could put. It was the world's first laptop, because it was a little Olivetti typewriter, and he had somebody rig him a roll of paper. And 2 other guys did the same thing, Mike Resnick and Ron Hubbard, only they didn't have the little Olivetti, they had regular standards, which was you got a roll of 8.5-inch wide paper that wasn't pre-cut, and you just put that sucker in there, and you got to the point where you could know 25 lines, double return, 25 lines, double return page number, and then at the end of the night you just start cutting pages off, and then you put them together, and send them off. That way you never have to stop and put new paper in. But I remember Isaac pulling up in front of a PhilCon, the only PhilCon I went to, and as one of the 3 guests of honor. And they opened the door, and there he was with a little board on his lap, because Isaac hated to fly. He absolutely would not fly. And so he took a limo down from New York to Philly, and he was sitting in the back with his wife Janet, and he was just typing away madly. Oh, we're here? Okay. Yeah, and the other memorable thing about PhilCon that year was that some genius decided that in the big hall they were going to have the guest of honor speeches, and in the next big hall they were going to have a panel called David Gerrold Tells You All You Want to Know About Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Jeez.
The con organizers were dragging every volunteer out of whatever they're doing and saying, go sit in the big hall. But I want to see the Star Trek. Go sit in the big hall. There must have been like 30 people. It was just one of those wonderful things. By the way, it's one of the reasons I don't do conventions anymore. I can't take the aggravation. That's why I have kids. Okay, well, that was my half hour. So, a couple more things, and then we'll get to the Q&A part. When you start dialing down at the end, you know, there are things that you put in earlier books where you're going, oh, hell, I forgot about that. You know, and so, you know, I'm going to beg your indulgence. If you're the kind of person who finds that one continuity error where you go, you know, hey, in Silverthorn, you said this. Please remember that I wrote the damn thing 29 years ago, and that if I forgot what color socks the guy was wearing, you know, spare me. And the other thing is that I hope you'll like it, because I'm going to do everything I said I'm going to do. It's going to be real nasty. A lot of people that you really like a lot are going away. A couple of them already have. And at the same time, I'm really trying to find a sense of triumph in all this and pull out a sense of there's a reason all this crazy stuff went on. So now we go to the part that I like to call either you ask questions or it really gets quiet.